No, this never happened. What you just saw was a high school kid's imagination. When I was 16, I decided to film a movie about global warming in my hometown of Subotica in Serbia. That's me, the director/actor. All my friends from school acted in the movie as well. We used a windblower to throw leaves at this girl I was in love with. The wind blew her away. My then best friend, too. Our teachers helped us out as well.
Samo ostanite mirni, nemojte paničiti.
We had partial nudity, romance, and a character who did drugs and died. Even my dad and uncle had cameo appearances as meteorologists. Pretty good acting for two lawyers, eh? Our special effects looked like this and this. We even had a film premiere at our school with a red carpet and everything. The audience enjoyed the creative ways in which we killed off our friends in the film. This guy got sucked in by a twister. And this guy just got frozen stiff. Heck, we even got interviewed by the local media after the premiere. The story was that climate change had caused disastrous weather events in our country, and we had been caught off guard. Well, exactly 10 years after our film, this happened.
To call this the flood of the century may sound like a cliche, but in fact, it's the perfect description.
The worst floods to swamp the Balkans since records began 120 years ago.
When the floods hit, I was working for a national television station covering the devastation. Unlike my movie, this was very real. Even our then Prime Minister Aleksandar Vučić was freaking out. Whoa, take it easy. Talking to people on the ground, it really felt like a freak event, but the freak events kept coming. Tornadoes, extreme hail, snowstorms, more flooding. Luckily for us, Serbia's Prime Minister made it his personal mission to save everyone from disaster. Here he is saving a child from a blizzard. He fell. Might need some help himself. Nope, he's fine. What a brave man. Not like this guy behind him who's freezing his ass off. Come on, man. It's just a little snow. What a wuss. On the other hand, our Prime Minister could brave out torrential rain and personally deliver supplies to flood victims.
Naravno, uvijek meni dođe najgori poslovi da ih obavljam.
I spremačica, i čistačica, i domaćica, i klozetarka, koju će još funkciju da mi dodele?
Yet despite all of these superhero powers, he couldn't save us. No one person could. Running away to a different country wouldn't help either, because the problems Serbia was facing were global. There was something much larger that was broken. We were all aware of this, but we didn't know how to fix it.
Poštovani gledaoci, dobro veče. Danas je 4. januar 1992. godine. Ekološka situacija danas u svijetu je krajnje dramatična. Na ovom globusu sve crne mrlje pokazuju mjesta gdje de facto života više nema.
These were the Surrealists, a popular Yugoslav comedy sketch show on Sarajevo television that started in the 1980s. In one episode, they predicted a grim future for our environment.
Na to je naravno uticao najviše Černobil koji se desio, ja mislim, jedno 3 godine prije naše serije i koji je upozorio ljudski rod šta može da se desi ukoliko tehnologija razbijanja atoma izgubi ljudsku kontrolu.
One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged.
As the cloud of radiation grows, so too does anxiety throughout Europe. Radiation levels in at least half a dozen countries are 3 to 20 times above normal.
Ali vrlo brzo smo mi to zaboravili. Zato i jesmo napravili tu zajebanciju sa Krškom, elektranom koja se nalazi u Sloveniji, između Slovenije i Hrvatske, koja je bila jedina nuklearna elektrana u Jugoslaviji.
Da nisi vidio curu, čeka, ima pola sata, kasnije mi žuta maskana, ima čize, ovako krastu ima ovdje veliku. Prag
tolerancije ljudskog roda se uvijek spušta, pa onda jedan od tih junaka kaže ovo nije radioaktivno, ovo je samo malo radioaktivno.
Yes, many quickly forgot about the dangers of nuclear power, despite Chernobyl's lasting legacy.
This entire region has seen a surge in cancer cases and birth defects, especially among the children of Chernobyl and their children.
Some Chernobyl residents tried to protect themselves in different ways.
Vodka is very good protection.
But for many, vodka didn't help. Thousands died from cancer-related illnesses caused by Chernobyl's radiation. We've all heard of Chernobyl because that disaster was propagated by Western media as proof of Soviet incompetence. But if what happened at Chernobyl was ineptitude, there certainly was no excuse for what the US did on purpose. This isn't Hiroshima or Nagasaki. The US started this a year after World War II ended. Not on enemy grounds, but on US-controlled soil.
Have you ever dreamed of living an idyllic existence under the waving coconut palms of a remote South Sea island? Of course you have. There are only 167 human beings here, 60 of them children. They are a gentle and lovable people.
In 1946, these gentle and lovable people who live on the Bikini Atoll of the Marshall Islands were politely told by the US Army that the US is going to turn their paradise into hell.
The Marshall Islands is where the nuclear age began, where something like the equivalent of one Hiroshima every day was exploded in the Marshall Islands for 12 years.
This was not just a nuclear experiment. It was a human experiment.
The United States needed some guinea pigs to study what the effects of radiation would do.
To the AEC Argonne Labs in Chicago last week came 7 men, natives of the Marshall Islands. John is mayor of Rongala, which is 100 miles from Bikini. He and the rest were irradiated by our March 1954 hydrogen bomb test. John, as we said, is a savage, but a happy, amenable savage.
This happy and amenable savage, as he was referred to, lost his son to leukemia. Many other children also died of leukemia, and other residents developed thyroid tumors due to exposure to radiation. They begged for international help. The world reacted by celebrating their demise with a new style of swimsuits named bikini, after the destroyed Bikini Atoll.
Some of our people were injected with or coerced to drink fluids laced with radiation. Other experimentation involved the purposeful and premature resettlement of people on islands highly contaminated by weapons tests to study how human beings absorb radiation from their foods and environment.
Thousands of natives were exposed to radiation, with many developing serious illnesses or dying from them.
Over the years, the number and the yield of weapons tested have rapidly increased, and so have the radioactive hazards from such testing. The number of children and grandchildren with cancer in their bones, with leukemia in their blood, or with poison in their lungs, this is not a natural health hazard. The malformation of even one baby, who may be born long after all of us have gone, should be of concern to us all.
U.S. soldiers were also exposed to harmful radiation.
My country, the United States, has done bad things. There is a long, long history of bad choices, bad wars, and basically military-industrial-led bad choices.
By the time the Cold War had ended and the nuclear arms race lost its momentum, the U.S. had amassed huge amounts of radioactive waste, depleted uranium. But where others saw an unusable waste product, Washington decided to put its uranium to use.
Battlefields and fighting are by nature hazardous to your health. Some hazards are easy to identify and well understood. However, some lesser hazards from new technological applications are not so well known and recognized. One of these newer applications is the use of depleted uranium in munitions and equipment armor.
To nije samo siromašan uranijum, to je nuklearni otpad.
Depleted uranium is radioactive waste left over from uranium enrichment for nuclear weapons and fuel rods.
Znači, to je nuklearni otpad koji se stavlja u oružje da bi oružje imalo veću probojnu moć. Drugi aspekt je ekonomski aspekt.
Some of the low-level nuclear waste needs to be deposited somewhere.
Ne moraju da skladište svoj nuklearni otpad, nego ga stavljaju u oružje i na taj način ga seju po celom svetu. Skladištenje nuklearnog otpada košta.
Depleted uranium was widely used in tank and cannon ammunitions for the first time ever in 1991, during the Gulf War in Iraq and Kuwait. Upon returning home, many U.S. veterans started feeling strange. This was labeled by the government as the Gulf War Syndrome.
A number of U.S. soldiers returning from Iraq have been suffering from a variety of cancers and mysterious illnesses. Some of them think they've been made sick by depleted uranium used in weapons by American troops.
And U.S. soldiers weren't the only ones who suffered.
Hundreds of Iraqis living near the battlefields have died from mysterious cancers. Deformed children have been born to Iraqi soldiers who fought in the war.
Just before the war, the Gulf War, we studied only 3 or 4 mortalities in a month. And now we are studying 30 or 35 patients dying in our department each month. It is an epidemic, and it is like the Hiroshima's tragedy.
As in Hiroshima, increased percentage of congenital malformation, increase of a tumor, of malignancy, leukemia, brain tumor, also in our society increase in this percentage.
In 1992, the U.S. Army Environmental Policy Institute, or AEPI, was ordered by the Assistant Secretary of the Army to find a way to reduce the toxicity of depleted uranium ammunitions. In 1995, the AEPI published the results of its investigation. The report concluded that if depleted uranium enters the body, it has the potential to generate significant medical consequences. It talked about the risks of radiation-induced cancer and genetic effects, and how uranium concentrates in the bone, kidney, and liver. Even though it concluded that depleted uranium is inherently toxic, only 2 months after the report was published, the U.S. used depleted uranium munitions during NATO's bombing of Bosnia and Herzegovina. For almost a month, NATO forces pounded Serbian targets in what they called an attempt to bring peace to Bosnia. One of the targets was a military factory in the town of Hadžići, just 10 kilometers from the capital, Sarajevo. In 2001, an Italian freelance journalist found 3 30mm bullets on this compound, depleted uranium bullets.
Najdrastičniji je primjer stanovnika Hadžića koji su prema ispitivanjima instituta u Vinči bili izloženi radijaciji 2000 puta većoj od dozvoljene.
Svi njihovi raspadni produkti osiromašenog uranijuma nalaze se na listi kancerogenih supstanci Svetske zdravstvene organizacije.
Od 1995. godine prema 2000. godini imamo naglo povećani broj malignih obolenja. 4 puta više je oboljevalo stanovništvo istočnog Sarajeva od malignih obolenja.
NATO's investigation publicly presented a different story.
All the research that we've seen shows no link between depleted uranium and leukemia or cancer. The team used radiological monitoring devices and detected low levels of radiation.
Right. Only 3 targets in Bosnia were confirmed to have been bombed by depleted uranium. And this was just a warm-up. A conflict was brewing not too far from Bosnia, in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, then comprising of Serbia and Montenegro, or more accurately, in Serbia's southern province of Kosovo. Just like the US experimented on the local population in the Pacific and its own soldiers in the Gulf War, a new kind of experiment was about to unfold in the heart of Europe. So NATO manufactured a case for military intervention.
Kosovo today, it's the most dangerous part of Europe. The province that rebels want to turn into Europe's newest country.
Our objective in Kosovo remains clear: to stop the killing and achieve a durable peace.
And allow these people to live in peace.
To live in peace.
Peace, freedom, and prosperity.
For peacekeeping operation.
To build peace.
And build peace. To live in peace. Peaceful.
Yes to peace.
Just peace. And peace. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace. Peace. Peace. Peace. Peace. Peace. Peace.
Yeah, they all wanted peace. A piece of Serbia. Thus, Serbia became the first country that was bombed and punished for fighting terrorism.
Albanian forces based in Albania were entering Serbia, carrying out terrorist attacks in order to elicit a harsh Serbian response, which could be used as a justification for NATO, meaning US, intervention.
Every country responds harshly to terrorism. And even NATO commander Wesley Clark admitted that bombing Serbia was only going to intensify the atrocities, not stop them.
But can we stop it on the ground? No, you can't stop paramilitary actions from the air. We all knew that.
As the invasion began, he informed the press that the predictable, his word, effect of the bombing would be to sharply escalate Serbian atrocities, which is what happened. U.S. started bombing Serbia. Serbia started driving out Albanians from Kosovo. If you look back at the discussion, the way it's framed is it was a humanitarian intervention because we had to stop Serbian atrocities.
To prevent the ethnic cleansing.
Ethnic cleansing and killing.
And that's the way it's presented in the West. You have to keep quiet about the fact that the Serbian atrocities were the predicted and expected consequence of the invasion. So we invaded in order to prevent atrocities which were caused by the invasion.
Western politicians even went so far as to call what was happening in Kosovo genocide.
The racial genocide
is genocidal attacks on the Kosovo people.
Even though a UN court ruled in 2001 that there was no genocide in Kosovo, that didn't matter. The US had already established its military base in Kosovo, and it wasn't going anywhere. In bombing the land with depleted uranium, NATO had committed acts that came much, much closer to an actual genocide.
In 2000, NATO disclosed DU weapons were used during its mission to bring peace to Kosovo. The Pentagon couldn't hide cancer deaths among NATO soldiers who were serving in the region.
Just like in the Gulf War, it began with the soldiers. But this time, it wasn't the Americans.
When the
sera dal TG1 sarà un comitato speciale della NATO a valutare le eventuali conseguenze sulla salute dei militari dopo l'uso di armi all'uranio impoverito in Bosnia e nel Kosovo.
Mattarella ha anche fornito delle cifre. Finora i casi segnalati di militari malati o deceduti sono 30. 21 sono soldati che hanno prestato servizio in Bosnia e in Kosovo. 7 è il numero dei morti.
After the NATO bombing, Italian troops took control of the Italian KFOR sector, a part of Serbia's Kosovo province that was heavily targeted with depleted uranium ammunition. Since 2001, the number of sick or dead Italian soldiers sharply increased.
I dati accertati solo dall'osservatorio militare, per cui certamente in difetto rispetto a quelli reali, sono di oltre 350 decessi ed oltre 7.500 malati.
The final report of the Italian Parliamentary Commission on Depleted Uranium concluded that Italian soldiers had been exposed to shocking levels of depleted uranium, and that it helped sow deaths and illnesses.
L'uranio impoverito è causa di tumori ed è arrivato il momento di dirlo con chiarezza. E questa la conclusione della Commissione parlamentare d'inchiesta sull'uso dell'uranio impoverito.
In May of 2015, in a case concerning an Italian soldier who died after serving in Kosovo, the appeals court in Rome ruled that there is an undisputed connection between the exposure to depleted uranium and cancer. Italian soldiers were not alone in this. Soldiers from Belgium, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, and other countries who served in Kosovo also saw a spike in cancer-related illnesses. But if all this happened to soldiers who were only temporarily stationed in the region, what happened to the people who live in Serbia? This is southeastern Serbia. 3 municipalities here were bombed with depleted uranium: Preševo, Bujanovac, and Vranje.
Ja sam rođen u selu Buštanju na teritoriji opštine Preševo. Tu je bilo bombardovanje osiromašenim uranijom. Moja majka je pre 2 godine umrla od kancera. Moji rođaci, moj brat pre godinu dana.
Srđan Aleksić is a Serbian lawyer who decided to follow his Italian colleague's example and try to bring NATO to court for its crimes.
U našem kraju od 1999. do danas 861 lice umrlo, od toga 80% od kancera. Radi se o teritoriji pre bombardovanja, o zdravoj sredini gde je retko ko umro od kancera, nemamo nikakve zagađivače. Danas imamo epidemiju pomora od kancera.
Što se tiče samog osiromašenog uranijuma, kod njega je problem što u onom trenutku kada dođe do eksplozije oružja, dolazi do rasprskavanja velikog broja uranijumskih čestica. I te uranijumske čestice su vrlo lagane i one mogu da se prenesu vetrovima stotinama hiljadama kilometara daleko.
Depleted uranium dust or smoke may be inhaled if respiratory protection is not worn. It may also be picked up and ingested if gloves are not worn, and the dust is not washed off. Heavy metal poisoning may occur, which can cause damage to internal organs and tissues. The second concern, radioactivity. Health effects of ionizing radiation depend on whether it is alpha, beta, or gamma.
Ta čuvena alfa čestica, ako se nalazi u vašem organizmu, može da prođe u drugu ćeliju i da normalna ćelija napravi malignu ćeliju. Osiromašeni uranijum može da utiče na bilo koji organ u telu. Pošto se zadržava u plućima, može da izazove karcinom pluća, može da izazove maligne bolesti kosne srži, može da izazove maligne bolesti digestivnog trakta, odnosno creva. Znači, praktično može da izazove malignu bolest bilo kog dela tela.
Near the town of Vranje, NATO heavily bombed the surrounding mountain of Pljačkovica with depleted uranium ammunition.
Tu su gađali oružjem sa siromašenim uranijumom predajnik RTS-a, koji su mogli bilo kakvom klasičnom bombom da sruše.
When the TV tower was hit, a group of workers from Vranje's waterworks were sent in to secure and clear up the damages. 8 workers were there every day for 25 days.
Od njih 7 su umrli od karcinoma, a 8 se leči od karcinoma pluća.
Stojadin Stošić was among those 8 workers.
To je udisano. Prašina, kopaš, praviš rupe za stubovi da betoniraš. To se sve udiše, onaj prašina. Vodu piješ, izvor nema 200 metara tu. To je sve isto bilo bombardovano. 8 nas je bilo. Jedino sam ja ostao od ti 8.
But Stoyadin is by no means in the clear.
I mene počinja. Poneki put se pomalo gušim, plici letos do gušenja neki put dolazi. Nije baš svejedno. Pod kredit sam da se lečim. 3 dece. Deca su mi bila 6 godina, taj najmaliji sin. Kjerkice, jedna 8, jedna 10, kada je to bilo. Nije mi lako bilo. Šta, borimo se za život.
Stoyadin's friend and colleague Goran Mitić, who drove the group every day to the bombed site, was the youngest of the 7 who died from depleted uranium exposure.
Moj suprug Goran Mitić, on je radio u vodovodu. Pošto je on bio šofer, on je vozio radnici.
Goran was also transporting the ground that the workers had dug up, thus inhaling the dust.
Znači, on je osetio posle 8 godina bombardovanja, bol u grudi. Mi smo odmah kod doktora, međutim, on je imao rak pluća. Mi smo se borili, išli na klinički, operisali, molili na zračenje, na sve, ali nije moglo. Znači, nije imalo spasa. Operisan je bio, ali nije imao spasa. Znači, i tamo kad smo otišli u Beograd, doktor me je pitao gde je bio, šta je radio, jer oni su znali i oni samo su se tim ljudi pogledali. Znači, to je to. Ja sam bila 38 godina. Imala sam 3 dece. Sin mi je bio 9 godine, ćera srednja 7 i manja je bila 5 godina. Znači, tu je bilo borba za život. Nekad mi nismo imali da jedemo, ja i deca. Ja sam po 1 krišku leba jela, dnevno, da bi imalo za njega. Ja sam bila 40 kila. On je jedničko do zadnji dan nije teo da ispolji. On je imao bolovi. On nije teo, on je sve ćutao, da ne bi deca ošetili. One su bolovi, ono je neizdržljivo. Znači, samo da uzneš glavu pa od zida udaraš. Znači, to se ne izdržuje, taj bol se ne izdržuje. Kad je čuo, sin je bio na poslu, kad je čuo da je preminuo, on je teo sve živo da polomi, da zapali. Šta ću ja bez oca? I ko što i jeste, ja sam tu, ali nije to to. NATO ga je uzeo. Ja sam to svima rekla. Na NATO nikada se ne povrati.
Kad biste mogli da se obratite svojim kolegama sada, šta biste im rekli?
Da se ne ponovi nikad više ovo što je bilo.
These couples in Serbia's capital, Belgrade, decided to get married during the 1999 NATO bombing. It was a clear message to those who were sowing death and destruction, even going so far as bombing maternity hospitals.
Uzeli su se neki mladi ljudi da žive ceo život zajedno, da nas u nekakvoj našoj budućnosti bude još više, da budemo srećni i lepši.
But as some of these couples soon found out, starting a family wasn't as easy as it was before the bombing.
100% je porastao muški sterilitet u poslednjih godina u Srbiji. I vi vidite sve veći broj mladih parova kod kojih su na izgled zdravi i muškarac i žena koji ne mogu da imaju decu.
Dobar dan, tugo, evo vraćam ti se ja.
And it looks like it wasn't all that great for many kids who were born.
Prva studija Komisije za istragu posledica NATO bombardovanja pokazuje da kod dece koja su rođena oko 1999. godine raste broj obolelih od malignih bolesti.
A naročito leukemije kod dece od 5. do 9. godine. Broj obolele dece od malignih bolesti krvi i mozga u značajnom je porastu i od 1999. godine je svake godine sve veći.
Serbia has been through wars before. These couples thought that once the bombing stops, things will get back to normal. None of them knew about the damage a single particle of depleted uranium can cause, and how much of it was dropped on them.
15 tona osiromašenog uranijuma, takva je procena, je isporučeno Srbiji i Crnoj Gori 1999. godine. 15 tona.
I guess you can't help but ask, how was any of this legal?
By using depleted uranium ammunition, NATO violated international humanitarian law.
Oh, so it wasn't legal. But aside from depleted uranium use, NATO contaminated Serbia in other ways as well.
Zato što su bombardovali fabrike, bombardovali su elektropostrojenja gde imate jako puno polihlorobifenila, to su jedinjenja koje su izuzetno toksična, kancerogena. Recimo 1 litar polihlorobifenila može da vam zagadi 1 milijardu litara vode. Onda tu je bio piralen. Tu su bili teški metali svih vrsta.
All this chemistry sounds pretty scary. Pyrrolin is a toxic and cancerous substance used as a cooling fluid in high-voltage electrical transformers, several of which were on NATO's hit list in Serbia. When NATO bombed one of these transformers in the southern city of Niš, 70 tons of this toxic fluid was released. Most of it burned off, while about 7 tons went into the ground, thus penetrating our food and water cycle. And then this happened. And this.
We sent our pilots into the air to destroy the oil refinery systems of Serbia, and they did so successfully.
Kako možete bombardovati rafineriju nafte u Novom Sadu, koji se nalazi stotinama kilometara daleko od Kosova, koji je u neposrednoj blizini glavnog izvorišta jednog velikog grada, trećeg grada po veličini u Srbiji, sa zaštitom Albanaca od strašnih Srba, naravno nikako.
After all, NATO destroyed only 13 Yugoslav army tanks during the entire 78-day bombing campaign. So what was their prime target?
60% ciljeva su upravo bili civilni objekti, da i nije bilo vojske. Oštetili su ekološki sistem gde god su gađali postrojenja koja su bila na mapama hazarda. Svaka zemlja ih ima i svaka zemlja ih dostavlja javnosti. Zašto? Zato što je potrebno da u slučaju upravo takvih nekakvih katastrofa se zna koja postrojenja treba zaštititi i koja postrojenja ne treba dirati. Oni su namerno to bombardovali, što znači da su hteli da vide šta će se dešavati sa stanovništvom u okolini. Bukvalno su od nas napravili eksperimentalno područje, jednu veliku eksperimentalnu laboratoriju. I u tome se ogleda sva genocidnost NATO-a i njihove agresije 1999. godine.
NATO's military campaign was named Operation Noble Anvil, but was mistranslated to Operation Merciful Angel in Serbian. A dark, twisted angel at that. One that killed both Serbs and Albanians, who it was allegedly trying to protect. Despite the cancer rate among Kosovo Albanians, according to intelligence sources, tripling since 1999, the self-proclaimed Kosovo authorities don't dare defy the official NATO narrative on depleted uranium, as NATO countries vastly supported their declaration of independence. Instead, Albanians got a private American hospital in Kosovo's capital, Pristina. I guess that's one way to do business. Give them cancer and then earn money by treating them. And the worst thing about this whole thing was that the depleted uranium was here to stay.
And as it takes billions of years for uranium to decay, the shadow of the ghost of the merciful angel will hang over the region virtually forever.
After experimenting on people with nuclear weapons and depleted uranium and exposing them to toxic chemicals, the experiment continued with genetically modified organisms, or GMO.
Genetički modifikovani organizmi su dobijeni genetičkom manipulacijom
gena iz jedne vrste i njihovim prebacivanjem u drugu vrstu i isključivo u laboratorijama. Takvi proizvodi se ne mogu dobiti u prirodi uobičajenim ukrštanjem ili procesom hibridizacije u institutima i drugim centrima.
One of 4 groups to introduce genes into plants in 1983 was Monsanto. The Monsanto Corporation was among the first to conduct field trials of genetically modified crops in 1987 and quickly became the world's most prominent GMO producer. Companies like Monsanto added rat genes into lettuce to make a plant that produces vitamin C, or spliced genes from moths into apple plants, offering protection from fire blight, a bacterial disease that damages apples and pears.
Genetička modifikacija podrazumeva i ubacivanje, primjera radi, gena ribe u paradajz, da bi se dobio paradajz sa čvršćom pokožicom, koji će imati duži period korišćenja u odnosu na domaći paradajz, koji će se lakše transportovati i neće biti osjetljiv na udare.
What's so bad about GMO?
Loše je što dosadašnja metodologija koja je primjenjivana u proizvodnoj praksi od 1996. pa na ovom, dakle 2 decenije, praktično se smatra da je na nivou operacije mozga sa lopatom. Sada nova metodologija koju je Monsanto kupio posle akvizicije od strane Bayera, sam Monsanto tvrdi, odnosno njihovi stručnjaci, da je ona 90% pouzdanija nego prethodna metoda. To znači da smo mi praktično bili celokupno čovečanstvo koje je imalo bilo kakav kontakt sa GMO, zamorčići 2 decenije jednog vivo eksperimenta, a sa tehnologijom koja je potpuno neproverena, a ja postavljam pitanje da li bi neko pristao da bude pilot aviona ako ne zna kako 90% sklopova aviona funkcioniše.
And that's what GMOs were all about. We simply didn't know the long-term effects of consuming them. But maybe this experiment was worth it to solve world hunger.
People who are just kind of categorically against this technology are really hurting the poor and the hungry in the world because they're denying them one possible way to produce more food.
U tom periodu broj gladnih se nije smanjio. Naprotiv, iz godine u godinu se povećava.
If anything, companies like Monsanto made the poverty situation worse. In India, for example, Monsanto sold the farmers rice and Monsanto's own herbicide called Roundup, which, according to a California court ruling, causes cancer in humans. The trick was that you had to use Roundup because it was the only herbicide that worked on Monsanto's seeds, seeds that could only be used for one agricultural cycle, meaning that you couldn't save the seeds and use them again, but rather had to buy more from Monsanto. So the costs started going up.
Seeds, fertilizers, pesticides cost more, so farmers have to keep taking loans. They are steeped in debt.
Ta kreditna zaduženost je bila tako enormna, a prinos i prihod od takvog pirinča nije mogao da podmiri troškove i onda, imajući u vidu tradiciju koja postoji u Indiji, hiljade indijskih poljoprivrednika je izvršilo samoubistvo da zbog dugova imanje ne bi otišlo, odnosno njihovo gazdinstvo, na doboš i da bi porodica sačuvala to imanje radi gole egzistencije.
Luckily for Serbia, this couldn't happen to us. Or could it?
U Srbiji postoji zakon o genetički modifikovanim organizmima kojim je iz 2009. godine kojim je zabranjen uvoz, gajenje, prerada i promet GMO i proizvoda od GMO. Kao i kod svakog zakona, i ovaj zakon se krši. Najčešće kod soje, uvozom semena genetički modifikovane soje i njihovim ilegalnim zasejavanjem oko 5000 hektara sa prosječnim prinosom od 3 tone, to je 15.000 tona. Ako podelite sa 20 tona, vi praktično dobijete konvoj od 750 šlepera soje koja je genetički modifikovana i koja svake godine krstari putevima Srbije, a niko je ne zaustavlja, ne kontroliše i ne sankcioniše.
We had a lot of reasons to be scared about what we were eating, considering the very concrete evidence of the West feeding us crap.
Products sold across the EU may look identical,
But when it comes to quality, there's a major difference between East and West.
It all started in Slovakia, where their Association of Consumers tested a selection of labeled food products purchased from supermarkets in 8 European Union member states, 2 Western EU states, and 6 Eastern EU states. The products in Eastern Europe, in essence, sucked. They largely had more additives and less actual food in them. For example, the Dutch Spar supermarket brand of strawberry yogurt had 40% less strawberries in their product in Slovenia. The Czechs got fructose glucose syrup in their Coke instead of natural sugars that they get in Germany and Austria. The Nutella sold in Hungary was less creamy than the Austrian version. Persil detergent had less of active ingredient in the Czech Republic than in Germany, meaning it didn't get rid of stains as well as it should. Cornetto ice cream in Hungary was foamier and had 19% more air in it than the ones sold in Austria.
Food producers say they're simply catering to local tastes and preferences.
Yes, we loved wearing dirtier clothes and eating more air. Basically, in Europe, there were 3 levels of product quality.
Jedan je kvalitet proizvoda i to najbolji za potrošače i tržišta starih 15 zemalja članica Europske unije. Drugi je kvalitet proizvoda za takozvane novo primljene članice postsocijalističke u periodu od 2004. godine do danas. A treći je kvalitet za ostale zemlje u koje spadamo i mi.
Wow, we weren't even second-class citizens. When it came to food, we're third class in Europe. But at least in Serbia, we still had our water.
Voda iz vodovoda nije za piće jer je koncentracija arsena veća od dozvoljene.
Ponovna analiza vode pokazala neispravnost kada su u pitanju bakterije.
Nema razloga za strah, deca slobodno mogu da piju vodu.
Situacija je ozbiljna, voda je zagađena.
Voda nije za piće.
Od 12 uzetih uzoraka samo su 3 ispravna.
Mi smo ponosni na našu vodu i to je voda koju samo mi koristimo jer je ona bolje kvaliteta.
But I'm not talking about tap water, which has its ups and downs in Serbia. I'm talking about this water. Clean, fresh, mountain rivers. Look how clear the water is. Go ahead, drink it. Don't be shy. After all, this might be your last chance.
Jedinu parcelu od 15 ari plodne zemlje porodica Grozdenović iz Radovnice može samo da navodnjava iz reke.
Mi od toga živimo, vidite da navodnjavamo, nemamo i vodu ako ne oduzmete mi od čega će živimo.
U Radovnici je počela izgradnja mini hidroelektrane, ali su za samo 2 dana građevinske mašine potpuno uništile deo korita reke.
What's a small hydropower plant and how can it destroy a river in just 2 days?
Male hidroelektrane su postrojenja koje služe za proizvodnju električne energije, a da bi proizvodile električnu energiju potrebna je voda, potrebne su reke, potrebni su vodotokovi.
This is Alexander Jovanović, nicknamed Chuta, born and raised on Stara Planina, a beautiful mountain in eastern Serbia, rich with rivers and streams, water that the residents use to, live. And yet, residents of villages across the mountain had to face a grim prospect.
Bez vode je nezamisliv život.
Ovo je sulud potos.
Sad neko da dođe da im uzme reku. Stvarno su ti bezdušnici.
Yes, but the Serbian authorities said that these small hydropower plants were in line with European Union requirements of producing green energy.
Problem je u tome što ni zelena energija nije svaki put zelena i način na koje se takvi projekti implementiraju. Kako se oni razvijaju, možda bude vrlo pogrešan i da u stvari napravi više problema nego dobrobita za celu priču.
Ono protiv čega se mi borimo je najveće zlo koje mogu neko da smisli, a to je derivacijna hidrocentrala. To je kad reku spakuješ u cev. I kad pobiješ sve živo u njoj, prvo je sravniš sa zemljom, pobiješ sve živo u njoj i ona nestane za sva vremena. A ti se obogatiš jer ti država dala status takozvanog povlaštenog proizvođača električne energije, što znači da narednih 12 godina svi mi plaćamo da ti zarađuješ milione, a da mi ostanemo bez vode.
But wait, I thought the whole point of renewable energy was to save the environment, not destroy it, and especially not in a national park. like what happened in the Kopaonik National Park.
Znači imate dve reke podnog Kopaonika, jedna je Samokopka, druga je Jošanička reka. Neko je 2010 smislio da tu izgradi 17 malih hidrocentrala u nizu. Znači u Nacionalnom parku Kopaonik izgrađeno 17 malih hidrocentrala, posljedica svega toga je potpuni nestanak tih dveju reka. Znači njih više nema.
This is what a dead river looks like.
Ljudi koji žive vekovima, generacijama unazad pored tih voda su osuđeni da se sele. Srbija će prvi put u istoriji imati ekološke izbeglice ukoliko se sprovede taj monstruozni plan da se izgradi 850 malih hidrocentrala, koliko je planirano, neće nam biti potreban nikakav rat. Za Balkan je planirano 3.500 malih hidrocentrala. Zamislite šta bi se desilo ukoliko bi bile sve izgrađene. Bilo bi 1 milion izbeglica, ovaj ceo prostor bi pretvoren u pustinju i ostavljen bez vode.
Ako Srbija izgradi 856 malih hidroelektrana derivacionog tipa, u godišnjem bilansu energije obezbedit će 2 do 3% neophodne energije, a uništit ćemo sve male brdsko-planinske vodotokove.
We are drying out our rivers, endangering our water supply, killing the environment, and destroying local communities for just 2 to 3% of our electricity?
I sad je pitanje veliko da li se radi o struji, o električnoj energiji, ili se radi o tome da će jednog dana nekako volševno parlament ili ne znam ko već vodi više ovu zemlju privatizovati vodu. Kao što je urađeno u Boliviji.
In 1997, the World Bank, a financial institution that gives countries loans, told the president of Bolivia, an impoverished country in Latin America, that in order to get $600 million in debt relief, they had to privatize the water in its third largest city of Cochabamba. In 1999, in a closed-door deal, Bolivian officials privatized Cochabamba's water to the U.S. engineering giant Bechtel, the same company that recently started construction projects in Serbia. The Cochabamba privatization deal meant that all the water in the city belonged to a private company. And I mean all the water. Even the water that fell from the sky as rain. Gathering rainwater became illegal. For many poor people, this meant having to eat less or not send their children to school or not go to hospital in order to pay for their own water. The World Bank's experiment failed. The Bolivian people rose up and fought a bloody battle to regain control of their water. They won, and the water was given back to the people. But it seems that the process of privatizing Serbia's water had just begun.
Imate u Rakiti najbolji primjer da je reka stavljena pod hipoteku.
Isn't it scary, though? Taking away from us the very things we need to survive. And in a way, they are also taking away this. Oh, I guess you can't see it, but it's there.
Danima imamo utisak da živimo u izmaglici i da se na neki način gušimo, kašljemo. U nekoliko gradova u Srbiji u proteklih 48 sati zagađenost veća nego u višemilijonskom Pekingu.
To je osjećaj kad izađeš napolje da uzmeš vazduh, nemaš.
Osim na disane puteve, aerozagađenje negativno utiče na kardiovaskularni i nervni sistem.
Beograd je tako poslednjeg dana januara bio najzagađeniji grad na svetu.
That's odd. I always thought that the most polluted city in Serbia was Pančevo, the site of a chemical plant and oil refinery right next to Belgrade.
Oni koji godinama žive u ovom gradu navikli su da žive sa zagađenjem.
Or Smederevo, where our biggest steel factory was located.
Ova kuća je nekada bila bela, ali je prašina iz železare vremenom potpuno obojila prednji deo i sve ostalo je prekriveno crvenim prahom.
Ovo je Černobil. Ovo je nenormalno.
Or maybe Obrenovac, the home of Serbia's biggest power plant.
Nošem vetrom obrenovački deo neba ponovo je na 1 sat prekrio pepeo s deponije TENT-a.
The factories were all contaminating our air, but they weren't alone.
Nekad su glavnim krivcima smatrana velika industrijska postrojenja. Međutim, i kad su brojne fabrike prestale raditi ili rade smanjenim kapacitetom, zagađenost je ostala ili je čak povećana.
Lošijem kvalitetu vazduha doprinose pre svega individualna ložišta.
30% zagađenja zraka dolazi iz motornih vozila.
Hold on, coal and oil? But fossil fuels were the basis of not only Serbia's, but also the world's energy production. Surely giving up our clean air and good health was a small price to pay. But aside from health concerns, one of the scariest theories was that all this pollution was causing global warming, or climate change as it's called today.
97% naučnika koji dolaze iz disciplina koje se bave geofizičkim problemima, odnosno našom planetom Zemljom, počevši od hemije, fizike, geologije i tako dalje, 97% njih smatra da su klimatske promjene izazvane ljudskom aktivnošću u poslednjih 100 i nešto godina, odnosno da su izazvane nekontrolisanom emisijom gasova sa efektom staklene bašte kroz proces spaljivanja fosilnih goriva iz kojih smo u stvari dobijali jeftinu energiju zadnjih više desetina godina.
Ali čekajte, postoji debata o tome, to nije sigurno, to je samo teorija.
Ne postoji debata u naučnom svetu, apsolutno ne postoji debata.
Ali to je samo teorija, zar ne?
Ne, nije teorija. Danas gomila podataka koje mi imamo u svojim rukama upravo pokazuju ono što je teorija predviđala pre 50 godina.
In fact, the fossil fuel industry has known about man-made climate change as early as the scientists did.
Since the 1970s, scientists at ExxonMobil have been, we now know they've been made public, forced to be made public. They've been producing severe warnings to the leadership about the effect of the use of petroleum on destroying the environment. So they all know about it, but they're not doing anything about it.
One thing the fossil fuel corporations like ExxonMobil and Koch Industries did do was to publicly dispute their own science and fund various climate change denial organizations like the Heartland Institute, CFACT, and Americans for Prosperity. Their job was to lobby against U.S. government policies aiming to decrease fossil fuel emissions and sway the public into thinking that the science on climate change isn't conclusive, or that it's a big hoax. And the politicians followed suit.
All of this with the global warming and that, a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax.
In fact, Trump has golf courses all over, and he's building walls around his golf courses to make sure that the sea level doesn't destroy them. Think about it for a moment.
Yes, even Donald Trump is preparing for the effects of man-made climate change.
Farmers all over the world, people living in coastlines that are being flooded, people subject to droughts and heat waves know something's wrong. About 70% of the American people know something's wrong. If we had true open vote in the United States, there'd be an overwhelming majority for moving to renewable energy. We have a lobby-driven politics, so it's still in the hands of the oil and gas sector.
You look at China and you look at all of these other countries, practically all of them, they're not adhering to the rules, and our jobs are being jeopardized, and not being jeopardized, they're being taken away. Our companies are unable to compete.
In a way, he's right. An economy based on infinite growth and consumption of limited resources is jeopardized by climate change. But the solution isn't to deny climate change is happening. The solution is to change the global economic system.
If the climate change will continue, as has been predicted, we will see a big change in all our communities.
U budućnosti, zbog klimatskih promjena, u scenariju u kome naša planeta 4 stepena toplija, postoji realan rizik da ćemo imati desetine, ako ne i stotine miliona ljudi koji će tražiti da se premeste sa svog trenutnog mesta stanovanja samo zbog toga što će globalni nivo okeana da poraste za 1 metar.
Remember the Syrian migrant crisis?
To that way is Serbia, and hundreds of migrants have been pouring into this area. They've declared a state of emergency. The troops are pushing us back, and they've closed the border on both sides.
The world's media descended on my hometown of Subotica on the Serbian-Hungarian border, where a crisis erupted when Hungary decided to stop the flow of migrants. The people of Subotica got a sneak peek at what the future may look like.
The situation is growing uglier by the hour.
Hungarian police fired water cannons and tear gas at the people gathered at the border's razor wire fence.
A few million migrants caused a crisis in Europe, more human suffering, and a surge in extremism. Climate change could displace up to 300 million people by 2050. Imagine the mess that'll arise if this is what's happening on a global scale.
To su bile poplave koje su, da kažem, u tom trenutku bile označene kao 1000-godišnje, znači stvar koja se apsolutno pre toga nikada nije desila u Srbiji. Razlog zašto klimatske promjene donose poplave, jače padavine, što je topliji vazduh, u njemu više vodene pare može da bude ugrađeno, da kažemo, u vazduhu. Ako u vazduhu imate veću količinu vodene pare, to znači automatski da izlaz sa druge strane, a to je kiša koja nastaje iz te vodene pare, može da bude veće nego što je bila u prošlosti.
Experts say the damage here is estimated at 1.3 billion euros.
Poor or developing countries like Serbia cope much harder with the effects of climate change. Sure, we Serbs do pull together in tough times. However, without proper regulations and awareness campaigns, regular citizens share the blame in polluting our environment in various ways. This woman is throwing her trash into the local river. To her, the river is a garbage dump. She's not the only one. It's not a lot of garbage, but when a lot of people do the same, this is what you get. The South Morava River has a telling nickname, Sad Morava. If you're familiar with Greek mythology, you could also nickname it the River Styx, leading to the underworld. Except instead of human souls, you have plastic. Lots and lots of plastic. Since many rivers converge, all that garbage converges as well, and you eventually end up with this.
Ovo je naša bruka. Ovo je tuga I opomen.
This is Jovan Memedović, one of Serbia's most famous journalists. He's the host of a national television show, Completely Natural, which, among other things, showcases Serbia's beautiful nature, but he also presents our dark side.
Stanje ekološke svesti u ovoj zemlji je na jako niskom nivou I prosto čovjek ne zna s koje strane da apeluje, s koje strane da priđe prosječnom stanovniku I da ga probudi. Ali mi izraz lica govori koliko to sve loše izgleda.
How could we have allowed this to happen? Where did all this garbage come from?
To su deponije koje, kao da imate sad ovde, deponiju gde je ovaj splav. I sad tu dolaze kamioni, tovare, podigne se nivo vode, odnese sve to nizvodno.
Unregulated garbage dumps, it seems, were all around us.
Pogledajte, ispred bilo kakve veće prodavnice je gomila papira I kesa I plastičnog otpada. Mi to po tome gazimo, to se gomila, prave se mini deponije svuda uz zgrade, uz prolaze. Ulazimo u ono najgore što može da ti se desi, a to je, već sam se navikao na smeće oko sebe.
And Jovan heard an interesting theory about our stance towards Serbia's natural environment, stemming from the centuries-long Turkish occupation of this land.
Iz vremena Turaka je to bio svojevrstan revolt prema okupatoru, da sve ono što je smeće I što je otpad skloniš iz svog dvorišta I ostaviš na ulici, a okupator neka čisti.
I think we need to realize that Serbia is not some foreign entity to us. The Serbia I love is the most beautiful country in the world.
Nešto što zahteva promenu ne koje kakvih partija, vlasti, ovo zahteva promenu svesti ljudi koji ovde žive.
What would you do if someone walked inside your home and emptied a sack of garbage in it? Would you tolerate it? No. You'd kick that person out and pick up the trash. So why do we tolerate this behavior on a grand scale? Why do we allow our lakes to bleed, our rivers to die? Our natural landscapes covered in garbage. This is our home, and it's time to clean up this mess. And I don't just mean this mess, I mean this mess. In 2000, Serbia had a revolution. Longtime President Slobodan Milosevic was overthrown, and the so-called Democrats took power. The people were hopeful that the system would finally change for the better, but something else happened.
Desilo se to da ono što je bilo prirodnih resursa, nacionalnih resursa je došlo u ruke oni koji su to htjeli da rasprodaju i za bagatelu onako da daju nekim ljudima koji su na sofisticiraniji način od bombardovanja da okupiraju ovu zemlju.
Serbia became an economic colony. You can call it globalization. I prefer not to use euphemism, and I call it colonization.
Domestic industry was destroyed, either closed down or privatized, where there was no intent for it to continue working. And then the foreign corporations came in together with foreign banks and took over the whole market.
Within a decade of Democrat rule, some 370,000 people lost their jobs. The Democrats were assuring everyone that things would soon stabilize.
Period stabilizacije je u toku, strpite se.
Ako je ovo stabilizacija, onda sam ja Sofija Loren.
The 2012 presidential election was our shot to take back control of our country. Then President Boris Tadić was the Democratic Party nominee for the presidency, running against the Progressive Party candidate Tomislav Nikolić. President Tadić was certain of his victory.
Ali sam siguran da će Srbija nastaviti sigurnim putem. To sam siguran.
But the voters had enough of the Democrats and wanted change. Boris Tadić lost to Tomislav Nikolić.
Srbija je večeras dobila novog predsjednika Tomislava Nikolića.
However, the real winner of this election was this guy, Aleksandar Vučić, who became the new leader of Nikolić's party after the election, as well as the new government's deputy prime minister. Vučić started asserting his power over the country. The new government had Western support because it started direct talks with the leadership in Serbia's breakaway province of Kosovo, which is what the West demanded. According to diplomatic cables published by WikiLeaks, a Progressive Party spokesperson, Nebojša Stefanović, had previously assured the US Embassy in Belgrade that they would support the partition of Kosovo, which meant giving away most of what NATO illegally occupied. But in 2012, Vučić had an approval rating of just 12.7%. He needed to gain popularity at home, and one arrest changed everything.
U Beogradu su danas privedeni i zadržani vlasnik Delta Holdinga Miroslav Mišković i njegov sin Marko zbog postojanja navodne sumnje u malverzaciju.
Njegovo bogatstvo procenjeno je na 3 milijarde dolara, a našao se i na čuvenoj Forbesovoj listi najbogatijih ljudi na svetu.
Miroslav Mišković was the most powerful business tycoon in Serbia, and as close as you could get to looking like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons.
Miroslav Mišković se obogatio 90-ih godina u vreme vladavine režima Slobodana Miloševića, a to bogatstvo uvećao je nakon demokratskih promjena 2000. godine. Međutim, nikada nije procesuiran za bilo koje krivično delo iz tog doba.
A nation that felt it had lost everything in the last 2 decades rejoiced. Finally, justice for the poor. The richest man in jail. Even though it was the Serbian prosecutors and police who uncovered financial crimes and figured out Mišković's financial abuses, Vučić wasn't going to let them take the credit for the arrest. He let the media tell the people who their hero was.
Izvolite. Ovo je politički poen pre svega za potpredsjednika Vučića.
Aleksandar Vučić je pokazao nenormalnu hrabrost.
Vučić je, kako mediji pišu, krenuo đonom, bez kompromisa na kriminal.
Vlasnik Delte prilikom privođenja je rekao da Vučić neće dočekati gostovanje na RTS-u.
Verovatno je to rezultat besa.
Jeste li stvarno dobili ili dobijate pretnje i da li je zaista stepen vaše bezbednosti dignut na najviši ili na viši nivo?
Bezbednost Aleksandra Vučića je ugrožena.
Ne plašim se ničega.
Vučić's approval rating jumped from 12.7% to 46%, thus becoming Serbia's prime minister in 2014 and president in 2017 with 55% of the vote.
To je to, borba protiv kriminala, borba protiv korupcije, pravda za te ljude koji su kao bili uništeni u tranziciji, Kada je Mišković uhapšen i kada je taj rejting toliko skočio, sa tim pričama se stalo. I više to nije bila tema. Kada ga budemo videli sledeći put kao pravog predsjednika vlade Srbije, on će govoriti samo o ekonomske reforme, fiskalna konsolidacija i tako dalje.
Mr. Vučić, in those days, he was prime minister, said that neoliberal way is the best way for Serbia. It was really shocking.
Neoliberalism didn't fall from the sky. It was imposed by the International Monetary Fund on Serbia with full compliance of the Democrats.
Ja se nadam da će naši pregovarači prihvatiti sugestije MMF-a.
What you just heard was the Democrats' prime minister telling his own negotiators to accept whatever the IMF proposes. When the government changed, many people thought that Serbia's stance towards the IMF would take a sharp turn.
The new government managed to make a turn of 360 degrees. This government is following in the footsteps of previous government, but even more determined and on occasions even more brutal.
Ja sam veći MMF od MMF-a.
Vučić's government imposed neoliberal austerity measures that the IMF demanded from Serbia, which meant cutting people's salaries, pensions, and social programs.
MMF, koliko god je po meni generalno loša institucija na svetskom nivou, u tom momentu nas je negde naterano nekakvu disciplinu.
Znam to. Znam, prijatelju, bolje čini mi se nego bilo ko drugi.
And with all that public money left over from austerity, it quietly got transferred into private pockets. Nothing was holy anymore, not even Christmas.
Is this the most expensive fake Christmas tree in the world? Estimated by some to be 4 times the price of the one outside the Rockefeller Center in New York, some in Belgrade certainly seem to think so.
An anti-corruption website revealed that this plastic Christmas tree that the authorities in Serbia's capital Belgrade purchased cost taxpayers close to $100,000. The money was paid to a private company called Keep Light. In the public tender, city authorities called on private companies to submit their offers for decorating Belgrade with Christmas lights. Belgrade authorities even added pictures of what kind of decorations they were looking for. The private Keep Light company won the tender, probably because the pictures that the authorities used in their tender were taken straight from Keep Light's catalog.
Da li ja tebi ličim na Deda Mraza? Da znate posećati malo?
The decision was made before the tender was announced, as is the case with most tenders in Serbia. In 2014, Belgrade was spending around $25,000 on Christmas decorations. By 2018, the spending jumped to a spectacular $3.2 million. By comparison, the nearby Croatian capital Zagreb spent less than $800,000 in 2017, and they had a Christmas market voted Europe's best 3 years in a row. Belgrade got a bunch of lights randomly thrown onto trees, a sad-looking Arc de Triomphe, and whatever the fuck this is.
Ovakva korupcija i ovakva pljačka govori o tome da je ovo isključivo budžet za džepove onih koji su u vrhu gradske vlasti.
Millions that could have been used to avoid deadly disasters.
Jutros u blizini Niša na pružnom prelazu bez rampe dogodila se nezapamćena saobraćajna nesreća. U autobus koji je prevozio đake udario je voz.
Od siline udarca autobus je, to verujem da možete da vidite, je prepolovljen, a i voz je skliznuo iz šina.
8 people, including children, were killed in what the media described as an accident. On this railway crossing, there was no ramp. The tragedy happened on a wintry morning when a dense fog covers the area.
Toliko je magla tu, spusti se magla, da mi ne možemo da vidimo, ali dešava se koliko bude autobus stane, pa izađe neko da pogleda da li ide voz i da će da čuje voz. I tad ulazi, ajde. I da se desilo da izašao čovjek i dok je on ušao, krenuo samo što je autobus prošao, voz po njega je krenuo.
This bus wasn't so lucky. Only hours after the disaster, the authorities were quick to place the blame on the bus driver.
Imamo informaciju da je najverovatnije do saobraćajne nezgode došlo propustom vozača.
Yes, it was the driver's fault. He didn't have the power to see through a dense fog. Nor did the others before him, who also never saw the train coming.
Jedno 10-15 u posljednjih 10 godina žrtava, što bi rekli. Čak jedna porodica 4-člana je stradala na ovom.
Meštani tvrde da su već više puta do sada apelovali na nadležne da ga obezbede.
Decades of pleas to save lives were met with silence from the government.
Jutro su 8 da ste došli, nije bilo više od 20 metra vidljivosti.
As a result of public pressure, the authorities finally decided to build a ramp on that crossing. However, I couldn't help but wonder, what about all those other unsafe railway crossings?
Od 2136 putnih prelaza, od toga je 477 ili samo 22,5% obezbeđeno sa polubranicima i branicima.
Accidents on railway crossings without ramps were a regular occurrence, and poor maintenance of existing ramps meant that many didn't go down when the train was passing.
Vrlo često ne radi ni zvučna, ni svetlosna signalizacija, niti se rampa spušta.
Wouldn't it make sense to avoid future disasters by building a functioning ramp on every crossing?
Vidite, apsolutno je jednostavnije da postavite rampu, ali da li je svrsishodno da se na svakom pružnom prelazu postavlja rampa?
Moja sestrična devojčica od 15 godina, inače druga godina srednje umetničke škole u Nišu, je bila u tom kobnom autobusu za koji bi voljela da se uspavala jutros i da nije otišla na nastavu, nažalost. Šta da vam kažem, povrede su ogromne, videli ste stravičnu sliku nesreće.
To su milioni i milioni evra.
Pa ja sam bio pozadi, ništa se nije moglo vidjeti, samo voz udario i na dva dela ja sam bio sedeo još. Izašao sam napoj, vidim, ljudi plaču, krv svuda.
Dimitrije je, kaže njegov otac, srećan jer je sedeo u zadnjem delu autobusa.
A oni koji su bili u srednjem delu autobusu, oni su...
Vi ne možete sve to da popravite. Niti možete fizički, niti imate sredstava za sve to i određujete prioritete.
Ja sam sinoć stigao iz Beograda. Ono je Las Vegas. Nemaju pare da postave jednu rampu.
Ne slažem se s vama da novogodišnja rasveta nije potrebna. Naprotiv, ja sam pristalica da šljašti grad od oktobra do negde aprila meseca.
Nisam rekao da nije potrebna, nego da postoje možda stvari koje su bitne.
Pa ja bih volio da se javiš neka firma koja zaista radi na tom visokom nivou tu rasvetu.
Nisam mišljeno rasvetu, nego na rampe, recimo.
A što se tiče rampi, slažem se sa vama da to moralo mnogo ranije da se obezbedi.
And yet, they still haven't been installed. Instead, the wrecked parts of the bus that was split in half were towed and placed next to a school playground, so the kids could watch the blood-soaked bus.
Tu su bili moji drugari, ne samo, sa svima sve sam poznavao koji su bili u tom autobusu. Pojezivo je dosta, nije prijatno kada se prolazi.
Prolazimo, vidimo drugare, da su tu bili, nije svejedno.
It was like a twisted lesson in neoliberalism. It's not about using our money to keep us safe, create a more just society, or develop our economy. It's about stealing our money and putting it in private pockets. These two cases demonstrate the hypocrisy and destructive nature of neoliberalism. At a time of austerity, huge amounts of money were spent on Christmas lights that damaged our environment because the energy they used resulted in more greenhouse emissions. At the same time, when we knew that using public transportation instead of private vehicles reduces CO2 emissions, the government did little to nothing to increase safety at railway crossings, while it invested heavily in building new highways. so that people could drive more and increase their carbon footprint.
Ovo je katastrofa.
And if you decided to rebel, even locally, you were quickly met with the brutality of the system. This is Vladimir Polovina, a mathematics professor from my hometown of Subotica. Vladimir wasn't happy with the mayor of Subotica, a guy called Bogdan Laban, because of his reckless stance towards the public good.
Devastirano zemljište i srušeni objekti koji bi mogli da posluže kao scenografija za snimanje nekog ratnog filma. Ovdje je u nastajanju novo zagađenje.
Zagađenost vazduha je konstantna.
Voda jezera Palić nikako nije za kupanje.
Ima izuzetno loš ekološki status.
Toliko loši da se gotovo ne može ni klasifikovati.
For these and other pressing reasons, Vladimir and his friends posted a couple of posters in the city to criticize Mayor Laban. Vladimir could assume that the mayor would be upset, but he couldn't imagine what would happen next.
Onda se desilo da me Bogdan Laban pozvao dok sam bio na svadbi sa suprugom koja je bila 8 mjeseca trudnoće i 2 ćerke. Tražio je susret.
Vladimir agreed to meet with Mayor Laban at a nearby pub.
Kada sam ušao u pivnicu Minhen, tamo sam vidio da sede trojica ljudi koji slove za njegove batinaše. Bilo mi je jasno odmah, čim sam vidio te batinaše, da to neće biti nešto baš prijatno.
Vladimir sat down across Mayor Laban and decided to record the not-so-pleasant conversation.
Šta te prebijem tu? Ne. Jel hoće te prebijem? Ne. Skinite naočare. Skinite naočare, džukelo jedno. Oko ću te bre izvaditi, jebem ni ti mater bezobrazu. Nećeš bre, u ovom gradu nećeš se osvrnuti više. Samleću te, kroz mlevene meso. Pa treba te sad se gorimo ovdje. Treba ti bre betonske cipele dam. Grkjan ću ti čupati, kad ga ščepam, kao moj pitbull onaj. Ću ti pojesti taj grkjan.
What you just heard was a mayor threatening a fellow citizen with violence, murder, and even cannibalism, simply because the citizen publicly expressed his political opposition to the mayor. And then things got physical.
Dobio sam 2 udarca od čoveka koji je bio među ovom trojicom batinaša.
Šta glumiš ti? A? Šta glumiš ti?
To je tek početak.
After audio of Mayor Laban's monstrous threats and the physical violence were aired publicly, Mayor Laban apologized for using the words he did, but attempted to portray himself as the victim of his political enemies.
U jednom izrežiranom slučaju, koristeći moj karakter emotivnog čoveka, uspjeli su da izbace ono najcrnije iz mene. Najbolja potvrda toga o čemu ja pričam danas jeste i današnja konferencija za štampu bivšeg gradonačelnika i njegovog mecene. Znači, ekspresno su se okupili da bi nešto izrekli. Jasno vam govori o čemu se tu radi.
Da postoji bahaćenje, pa uvek ćete imati u svakoj vlasti, ne samo u Srbiji, imaćete u Nemačkoj, imaćete u Francuskoj, gde god imaćete tu neko...
Ali ipak u Francuskoj i Nemačkoj gradonačelnik ne bi pretio svom sugrađanima.
Pa ali ga sigurno taj sugrađan ne bi vršio tu vrstu pritiska.
Mislite da bi gradonačelnik trebalo da reaguje pretnjama?
Pa da li je sad to baš bila pretnja?
Samleću te, kroz mlevene meso.
In a Kafkaesque turn of events, the government pretty much let Mayor Laban off the hook, while the guy he threatened, Vladimir, was arrested.
Ja sam završio ekspresno u samici. Ja izlazim pred tužioca, saopštava mi se da sam ja optužen za ugrožavanje bezbednosti gradonačelnika.
Wow. It's like the justice system replaced the Constitution with George Orwell's 1984. When Vladimir was finally released, he formed a movement called Free City to try to change the system by participating in the political process. But how realistic was it to change things through politics, given the current state of the media in Serbia?
Vi imate medije koji su u potpunosti slobodni da kritikuju vlast kao što i treba da se dešava u jednoj demokratskoj zemlji.
And yet, it would seem the media freely chose not to. Because when tens of thousands peacefully protested against the government in Serbia's capital, this is how local media reported on it.
daleko malo ljudi je prisustvovalo protestu. Bilo je dosta neorganizovano. Protest je organizovan protiv nasilja, što je veliko licemerje zbog toga što upravo ti ljudi koji su organizovali protest pozivaju na linč, silovanje, nasilje, državni udar i to smatramo jako licemernim.
And it's not much different with bigger media outlets, especially if you look at the statistics. In the month before the 2017 presidential election, how many seconds did each of the candidates get on Serbia's main TV channels? The opposition candidates: Vuk Jeremić, 5,367, Saša Janković, 4,969, Vojislav Šešelj, 4,481, Nenad Čanak, 3,489, Boško Obradović, 3,121, Milan Stamatović, 2,581, Aleksandar Popović, 2,522, Saša Radulović, 2,521, Miroslav Parović, 2,313, Luka Maksimović, 1,350, and the government candidate Aleksandar Vučić, 51,741. And a lot of the time when the opposition candidates did get mentioned, it would happen in a negative context. On Serbia's largest commercial TV station, Pink, the three most popular opposition candidates were mentioned in a negative context 60% of the time, while the government candidate was mentioned in a positive context 100% of the time. And that's pretty illegal according to Serbia's laws that guarantee a fair and balanced approach to all candidates.
A vjerovatno se krši očigledno svaka televizija ili mediji u toj polarizaciji navija za nekog.
So the government found a solution.
Regulatorno telo za elektronske medije je saopštilo da ove godine neće pratiti rad medija tokom izborne kampanje.
But this kind of stuff wasn't just during election campaigns. In the last 2 years, in all of Serbia's television news programs, government officials were given an average of 90% of airtime.
Kada vi pogledate mainstream scenu medijsku, dakle u Srbiji, vi ćete vidjeti da su sve televizije koje imaju nacionalnu frekvenciju pod direktnom kontrolom Aleksandra Vučića. Kada pogledate dnevnu štampu, vidjet ćete da osim dnevnog lista Danas, sve ostalo je malte ne isto, dakle isto je pod kontrolom Vučića i ljudi koji su bliski njemu.
All the tactics and techniques that the previous government used, this government is using as well, and they even improved it somewhat and made it worse as far as the media freedom is concerned.
One of Vučić's very first jobs was being a journalist during the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1992. He learned early on the importance of shaping public opinion through media. But why the need for such total control? Maybe Vučić can explain. In English, I might fill in the blanks.
People in Serbia, they don't love me that much.
So, to be loved, you need to get rid of the facts.
Facts are not in fashion.
Yeah.
Emotions are something that you are selling.
But to hit the right emotion, you need to control the narrative. So if a journalist writes about government wrongdoings, maybe someone will set his house on fire. Or if a journalist asks nasty questions, maybe her national TV show will get cancelled. Or let's say anyone criticizes the government, maybe the media jointly crucify that person. And if you hear about all these things happening...
You heard of some of these cases that were happening in Serbia? No, you haven't.
Of course not. I mean, you could still vote.
On ima pravo samo da glasa I ništa više od toga.
Jedan čovek, jedan glas.
Tako je, gospođo.
But when you have an election campaign where one side controls all the instruments, you get this.
Vučić, kad nešto protiv njega kažu, mene duša maže boli, kao mog sina kad bi vređali.
Volim Vučića kao sina rođenog jer nemam sinova.
On je za mene dete snova.
Ovo je predsjednik, je živ I zdravi da peva I da kuća mu peva.
Vučić je naš ponos.
Tako bi voljela da ga zagrlim, jer jedini pošto nije Vučić, niko više. Niko. I želimo sve što želim mojoj čerki jedinici, to želim I njemu.
Šta da ti pustim?
Vučića.
Vučića da ti pustim?
Da.
Što?
Zato. Zašto? Ali sinja ne ispira mozak deci u ljudima. Da, ne može učiti.
It seemed that the only way out was to completely isolate yourself from civilization.
Znaš ko je Vučić? Ne. Aleksandar Vučić, znaš ko?
Kom jede mater?
But maybe it didn't have to be that way.
The basis for a more equal, more just society is the participation of everybody. We as politicians, that's our great responsibility to really get people to come to talk about these issues, not only to vote, but also to let their voice be heard.
And if we had any chance of fighting for our environment and a better system, the people had to take control of the narrative, like they did in Chile in 1988. This was the media in Chile under dictator Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet had come to power with the help of the CIA in a bloody coup that unseated democratically elected President Salvador Allende. During Pinochet's rule, the state killed thousands, imprisoned thousands more in concentration camps, and introduced neoliberal reforms that impoverished Chile. It was fascism. For 15 years, there was only one voice in the media, Pinochet's voice. He had power, but he wanted legitimacy. So Pinochet asked the people to vote in a referendum on whether he should stay in power or leave. But to make the referendum look as democratic as possible, for 1 month, both sides were given 15 minutes airtime every evening on television. Pinochet was confident in his victory. After all, he pretty much controlled the system, and the people were afraid of him. But after only a few days, something strange started happening. The polls started shifting. The government couldn't stop it because the opposition had those pesky 15 minutes every night, and those 15 minutes gave Chileans hope. Pinochet lost the vote. The dictator was defeated. Chile had equal media coverage for both camps in a dictatorship. We didn't have this in what the West called a democracy in Serbia. It was time to break the fear, to change the system, and win our freedom. And the fight had to start somewhere, even in a small city in eastern Serbia.
Pojavio se gospodin novopečeni predsjednik države, gospodin Vučić, u Pirotu i nakon 7 meseci upornog ćutanja, odbijanja, nema gde mi smo bili, koga nismo molili da rešamo taj problem, niko nije hteo da nas primi. Pojavio se Vučić da otvara neku školu okričenu u Pirotu i ja ga sačekam i uspem da dođem do njega.
Chuta, the activist, told the president that building a small hydropower plant in his home village on Stara Planina mountain and forcing the Topli Do River into a tunnel will destroy it.
Morate samo nađete mesto gde ćemo se seliti. I kažem da Antić neće niko da nas primi.
As always, Vučić looked bored. In the end, he quietly responded. Sure, throw the hot potato to Mr. Antić, the energy minister.
I to se stvarno i desilo. I onda se desio taj sastanak i onda smo došli na kraju do toga da su oni odustali od izgradnje tog tunela.
It seemed that the politicians had saved them. But the activists learned a valuable lesson. You can't trust politicians to fight for you if you're not willing to fight for yourself.
Posle manje od 2 meseca se pojavili na Rakijskoj reci i na Crnobrškoj reci gore na Staroj planini i krenuli to da sravnjuju sa zemljom.
The people of the Stara Planina mountain had given up on asking politicians to help them and took matters into their own hands.
I onda je nastalo nešto što se zove ta unija sela Stare planine i onda smo krenuli s protestima.
Nema više straha. Sad nas ima mnogo.
Ne damo reke, ne damo reke.
Branite svoje reke, reke su vam život. Voda je život.
Šta da radi narodno progledu?
Bez obzira šta piše u zakonu, bez obzira šta piše u tim dozvolama, to je što više ne interesuje. Znači, mi imamo ljude koji su na terenu već 2 godine stalno Gde god se pojavi bilo koji bager, da nam gura reke u ceo, mi ga fizički sprečimo.
Some investors hired private security that even assaulted disabled protesters.
Juče je bilo više policajaca nego što ih ima u opštini.
This only strengthened the protesters' resolve.
Znači, kad neko kaže, sad ja imam dozvolu i sad ću ja reku gde smo mi prohodali, da vam gurnem u cev. Mi lepo uzmemo lopate, pijuke, skupi se nas 200 i to što je on bagerom zatrpao, jednu malu rečicu koju potočit će da mali, mi lepo uzmemo i vratimo tamo gde ona tekla. A onda oni nas tuže, pa onda završamo po sudovima, pa nam onda prete, pa onda već šta se dešava. Uglavnom, to je model po kome mi funkcionišemo.
Sometimes the activists won their cases in the courts. But regardless of that, the rivers were in the hands of the people.
Želim da kažem da smo svi mi država i da će biti onako kako narod kaže na kraju.
U Pirotu se prošle godine desio do tada najveći ekološki protest u istoriji ove zemlje. Došlo do 4000 ljudi da kaže ne ludacima.
And the protests kept coming. I even went out to lend my support.
Jer ono što vi radite za odbranu reka u vašem kraju, vi zapravo branite reke u celoj Srbiji.
While some investors continued to press for their small hydropower plant projects, many started backing down.
Ne može tu on da radi ono što lokalno stanovništvo kaže da ne može se praviti.
Oni više ni jednu reku neće moći da taknu i kap vode im nećemo dati.
Borit ćemo se do smrti.
Pa mi smo spremni i svoje živote da damo. Znači nećemo dati reke na Staroj planini.
Odbranjena Toplodolska reka, odbranjena Visočica, odbranjena Rudinska reka i odbranjena Jelovička reka. To su sve reke na Staroj planini.
Eventually, even the police started joining them.
Ovde je očito prekršeni ustav i zakoni, prirodna bogatstva i vode su zaštićena, to niko nema pravo da oduzima.
Borci za očuvanje životne sredine odali su pobedu na Staroj planini. Odlukom Vrhovnog kasacionog suda sprečena izgradnja mini hidroelektrane.
Mi smo već pobedili, Boris. Mi smo naše reke već odbranili. I to znaju svi.
Revolutions happen where you least expect them. And all you need is a group of motivated and well-organized individuals. In 1959, a dictatorship was overthrown in Cuba. The next year, a young Cuban revolutionary, Fidel Castro, was greeted as a hero in the United States, a modern-day Robin Hood.
It's one of New York's most enthusiastic receptions for a visiting notable in quite a while.
Here you in the United States are accustomed to see government coming for money. I came for good relations.
But he also came to let the United States know that Cuba will run things their way.
Cuba is expropriating United States-owned property in that country.
Washington quickly imposed a trade embargo on Cuba. Castro realized that you can't have good relations with the US and be an independent country. Cuba chose independence. In 1961, Cuba became one of the founding members of the Non-Aligned Movement at the Belgrade Conference, a group of nations that in the midst of the Cold War wanted neither to be a part of the West nor the East. Thus, Cuba survived a US invasion, 638 assassination attempts against Castro, and commercial, economic, and financial sanctions. But as the Cold War ended and the non-aligned movement started fading, Cuba lost many trading partners.
Desaparece el campo socialista en la década del 90, a principios de la década del 90, nuestra agricultura se quedó sin recursos algunos. Nos quedamos sin posibilidades de adquirir maquinaria, sistemas de riego, y lo que es más difícil aún, se creó una situación muy difícil.
Castro named this period the Special Period. Food shortages were rampant. The government was under pressure. So they told Cubans that if they saw a patch of land where they could grow food, they should go for it, even in urban areas. And the Cuban people did just that. resulting in a program called Organoponicos, urban agriculture using organic gardens.
¿Dónde la practicamos? Dentro de las ciudades producimos fundamentalmente hortalizas, producimos en los patios frutales, puede ser también en los tejados.
Entrepreneurship in communism? Yep, you could see small organic gardens around every corner in Havana. The love and care that went into this type of farming was heartwarming. I also saw chicken farms and even rabbit farms on rooftops. It seemed that wherever you went for a walk in Cuba, fruits and vegetables were readily available, and they looked delicious. I visited one of the bigger urban farms in Havana to talk to the guy who started the urban agriculture program.
So we are on a farm, but we are in the city. This is revolutionary, isn't it?
En Cuba algo revolucionario es casi todo.
And if you're wondering about the quality of the food, Pablo's farm sustains several hundred customers, including over 20 foreign embassies.
So ambassadors eat this food as well.
Por supuesto. Ahora mismo se acaba de ir el embajador de la FAO que vino a comprar.
What Cuba did was to shorten the distance between the people and where their food is being grown, meaning that less energy is used for transport. And by growing food organically, they made their environment a better place.
Me siento realizado de un especialista que mataba al mundo aplicando grandes dosis de productos tóxicos. Me he tenido que convertir en un especialista cuyo objetivo es el mismo, producir alimentos, pero por tecnología, amigables con las personas, con los animales, con el medio ambiente, alcanzando altos rendimientos y buena rentabilidad.
Sí, porque el salario medio nacional, el nuestro supera.
Un salario equivalente o superior a mi salario, que soy un doctor.
Por supuesto, porque la agricultura tiene la cara fea, es muy dura. Todas las personas piensan en la agricultura 3 veces al día, en el desayuno, en el almuerzo y en la cena. Pero los agricultores tenemos que garantizar las 3 cosas. Por lo tanto, compañones, no se preocupen porque yo gane más que él.
Wow. Scientists and farmers working side by side, with experts feeling proud that the farmers earn more than they do. And they had programs to teach future generations about the importance of healthy eating.
En cualquier país del mundo se puede organizar estas producciones.
GMO lobbyists tell us that we need GMOs to solve hunger, but Cuba is a living example that this simply isn't true. Despite not having a lot of resources and being blocked at every corner by the United States, Cuba achieved self-sufficiency and food security, but also a healthier populace. If Cuba can pull it off, anyone can. And many started their own urban farms, even in big cities like Belgrade, where people could grow their own food.
Znači kako krene paradajz, odavde uzimam paradajz, uopšte ne kupujem, to je jako značajno, ne kupujem više paradajz na pijaci.
People use their own plots of land or united with others. Many agricultural businesses also started looking at ways to produce food in a more environmentally friendly way.
Poljoprivredni kombinat Beograd za zagrevanje svojih staklenika ne koristi više naftu, već samo biomasu.
These were all steps in the right direction, but time was quickly running out and we needed our own revolution, one of awareness.
Kada smo primetili to smeće i snimili na Drini, koja se gomila ispred hidroelektrana u Višegradu, izgleda da je i njih samih tamo bilo sramota što se to dešava ispred njihovog praga kućnog. Za 2 meseca su sve očistili.
That's right. They picked up the garbage from what was essentially their home.
Drugim rečima, možemo mi da se dovedemo u red. Vrhunski čin patriotizma. Čuvaj ovu prirodu koja ti je dala sve.
I believe in the power of the people. When we identify what the problem is, we can fix it. And no problem is too big for us, not even climate change.
Prvo što treba da uradimo je da se više nijedan dinar ne uloži u fosilna goriva, bilo da se radi o nafti ili o uglju, bilo šta drugo, niti u izgradnju bilo koje infrastrukture koja podržava proizvodnju energije iz fosilnih goriva. S obzirom da industrija solarnih panela, recimo, i proizvodnje energije iz sunca, i vetrogeneratora i proizvodnje energije iz vetra doživljava eksponencijalni rast u ovom trenutku. Priključenje tom eksponencijalnom rastu pre od drugih znači da ćemo mi imati možda i neku vrstu prednosti u budućnosti.
Regardless of whether you accept the science of climate change, wouldn't you rather have folks who are currently working in dirty coal mines or on oil rigs to work on wind farms or with solar panels and making our environment a better place?
Zelena energija je u stvari jedan prostor za nova radna mesta.
According to the Solutions Project, if Serbia was to transition to 100% wind, water, and solar energy, 50% of its energy could come from solar plants, 16% from residential rooftop solar, 15% from commercial and government rooftop solar, 10% from onshore wind, and 8% from hydroelectric. In the process, 42,800 construction jobs and 46,600 operation jobs would be created. Basically, around 90,000 40-year jobs would be created. Improving energy efficiency would decrease overall energy demand, and the amount of Serbia's land needed for all those generators, around 1%. Health cost savings per year would be $27 billion, which constitutes 10.3% of Serbia's GDP. And the amount of lives lost to air pollution that we'd save each year, over 3,000. Energy costs would go down, and the overall energy, health, and climate cost savings would be $9,273 per person. The transition pays for itself in as little as 2.3 years from air pollution and climate cost savings alone. See, that's what our politicians and governments should be discussing. How to really look towards the future instead of looking towards the past.
Želim da kažem da je Kolubara proizvela 1.000.000 tona uglja više od planiranih bilansa, 1.000.000 tona dakle uglja. To je velika stvar i to je, čini mi se, najvažnija stvar.
Šampanjac za uspešan i dugovečan rad novog rotornog bagera za iskop uglja u kolubarskim rudnicima.
Jeste li ponosni na ovo što smo napravili? Pa to je za radost. Gledajte kad nam se sve pokrene. Železara, kad nam se pokrene Petrohemija, Azotara i MSK, kad konačno krenemo da proizvodimo ugalj na zapadu.
I know we'll have lots and lots of dirty energy, dirty industry, and a dirty country. Just like with the battle for our water, our food, and our environment, cleaning up our country was a battle that we'd have to start ourselves. The neoliberal system was incompatible with the fight against climate change because it marginalized environmental awareness, rational consumption, and social justice that were needed to create an economy in tune with nature.
The system is everything around you that determines what you can or cannot do in a society. That's a system. Every single law that's passed is a part of the system. Every public authority is a part of the system. When you want to do something, you need to get some permit. That's a part of the system. The system is supposed to work so that it provides good environment for citizens to realize their potential, their dreams, their aspirations, and for the successful ones to actually drive the society forward. Now, what we have in Serbia and in the whole of Balkans is we have something we call partocracy, which is the political party in power takes over the whole system. It becomes its own extension. It uses the system for hiring their own party people to help them maintain power. They corrupt every single institution in the system so that they serve the interest of the party in power, not the public.
Hold on there, fellow Serbian Canadian. Sure, you're in the opposition now, but you yourself were a part of that very system when you were appointed as the government economy minister side by side with Aleksandar Vučić.
Practically within a couple of days, I went into a first conflict with Vučić, and it continued up until my resignation, 4 months and 23 days after that. What's important for people to understand, corruption starts at the top. Yes, there is corruption in the middle. Yes, there is corruption in the bottom, but that's because the corruption is at the top. And once you change the top and change the way you behave at the top, everything starts falling into place.
Sasha's ministry essentially became an experiment for his small team in changing the way things worked.
Within a very short period of time, we put policies in place and we put a system in place. For every workplace in the ministry or the agencies, we said, This is your job, this is the description, this is what we expect you to do, very concretely. And then you have to put a structure in place that monitors that. Imagine our surprise it started working like that.
The ruling party could no longer run the economy for its own benefit. The system in Sasha's ministry had changed, so the party put a stop to it.
I resigned because all the policies that I wanted to implement were blocked.
In less than 5 months, Sasha proved that a system can change in an entire ministry. And if it can change in one ministry, it can change in all of them, and in every single government body.
Govorimo o sistemu koji god da je stranka na vlasti, ne samo sad što je Srpska napredna stranka. Ne valja mnogo toga. Ja samo postavljam pitanje, svi ti koji su protiv, a šta nude kao alternativu? Ja to ne vidim. Sve te populističke kao partije u jednom momentu kada dođu do situacije da vladaju, ipak shvate, čekajte, nema savršenija od ovoga po čemu smo mi inače došli na vlast. I onda si one nekako ukombinuju, uđu u taj sistem jer vide da ne postoji ništa drugo.
Yes, that's what our politicians should be telling us.
There is no alternative. There is no better system. I haven't seen it. This is as perfect as it'll ever get. Resistance is futile.
The system has not recognized how important meritocracy is.
Meritocracy?
Meritocracy means that the best high-quality people are in places where decisions are made.
No, Mr. Katic, perhaps you didn't hear Mr. Djukanovic. There is no alternative for the existing system. The government simply hasn't seen it anywhere.
Our president, Mr. Vučić, was in China, and if he was really listening or reading or studying what is happening in China, he should have seen how important meritocracy is. China is an absolutely meritocratic system.
Wait a minute. China? Doesn't the Communist Party of China decide on who gets which position?
In order for you to make career, you start at the periphery of system. You work far from Beijing. Then you are successful and recognized. Then they take you a bit closer to Beijing. And that process, they said, lasts between 15 and 20 years.
15 to 20 years of proving yourself? Wow, for someone living in Serbia, that sounds so strange, considering our defense minister never had basic military training. Our interior minister and finance minister were accused of plagiarizing their doctorates by numerous university professors, and the head of Serbian intelligence was accused of being a producer of ceramics, which he emphatically denies. He said he worked as a gardener. Are these the kind of folks that can develop a country?
You need intelligent, high-quality people in government, and you don't have that. Because neoliberalism is saying, or that is the doctrine, that you don't need state. And if you don't need state, then you don't need smart people in that kind of state. China didn't give up on planning. They introduced market, they did whatever is necessary to open their economy, but they are planning. Without that, poor country cannot make progress.
Yes, China was an incredibly poor country only a few decades ago. And look at it now.
Well, it is official. The United States is now number 2. The Chinese economy just overtook the U.S. to become the largest in the world.
But how can a small country like Serbia compare to China in any possible way?
You cannot use China or that template and say, okay, we're going to do what China did. But what we can do, seek truth from facts. China knew that if they don't strengthen their domestic industry and if they would allow foreign companies to take over, they will be dead. So China is probably the best strategic model that you can imagine.
I know what you're going to say. China is not a democracy. That's true, but that doesn't mean that we can't pick and implement what we like from other countries and let them keep what we don't like. And by the way, meritocracy doesn't just exist in China.
France probably has the best administration in the Western world. Better than German, better than English.
Or maybe we don't have to look at other countries, but simply our own history.
Socialist Yugoslavia, up to, I would say, middle of 70s, was a meritocratic system par excellence.
Or maybe not even our own history, but one Serbian institution we have today.
In Serbia, we have one meritocratic institution, mathematical gymnasium. That's a meritocratic institution. You take the best kids that you have in Serbia, and when you put them together and when you work with them, you get all these young champs that bring us medals from all around. Can you imagine if you would say now, well, we shall put in this school only kids of our party members?
I think you get the picture. The West doesn't let their economic colonies go that easily. But countries can take control of their economies, and it starts by printing your own money.
Let's say that in a certain year, the society produces this many goods and services. Let's say this is the economy of Serbia, and these are all the goods and services produced in Serbia in a certain year. Next, there's a certain amount of money that's in the circulation that's used for the exchange of goods and services. So next year, our society, our economy grows, and we produce more goods and services. Now, if the amount of money stays the same, there are more goods and services for the same amount of money, so the value of each one of the goods and services would go down because it's the same money representing more, which tells us that in order for the value of each one to stay the same, we need to print extra money for extra goods and services. Essentially, this is what the monetary policy is supposed to be.
Makes sense, eh? Okay, we can remove the props now.
So the trick in running monetary policy is to print enough money for the economy to keep going. In the West, and Serbia falls into that category, there are three places where the money is being printed. Federal Reserves in the United States, European Central Bank, and Bank of Japan. For the West, that's where the money is being printed. What happens for Serbia and countries like Serbia? Instead of printing its own money, that new money comes in a form of debt. Our national bank serves to convert euros or dollars into dinars, and that's how the new dinars come into circulation.
Serbia's national currency, the dinar, is essentially debt, and so are the national currencies of most countries in the world. This was the globalist agenda.
Why do we have this dogma, that you're not allowed, you should not print money? Because if you don't borrow money, you're free.
Ah, freedom. It might be coming sooner than we thought.
In France, for example, yellow vests think that they can change something. When I first went there, I thought that I will see some young hoodlums from suburbs. No, you see normal middle-class people angry as hell.
We have the rise in sovereignist movements throughout Europe. Sovereignism means that my democracy is working for me and cooperates with everybody else. The threat for democracy is from the globalism.
Democracy wasn't imposed in 2000. It was essentially cancelled, so that Serbia could serve the globalist agenda. And the world was clueless about the extent to which the voting process in Serbia was a farce.
You have dead people voting.
Dead people vote?
Yeah, dead people vote. As you vote, there are those lists of voters. So if somebody just puts a cross next to it and signs up and then puts a ballot in the, who's to know? There is a joke in Serbia, when a man comes to the voting place, votes and then puts a chair down and sits down. And then the election officer asks him, so what are you doing here? I'm waiting for my father, he says. Well, wait for him at home. I said, well, no, he died some time ago, but I see he votes every year, so I'm waiting here to see him.
Serbs have dark humor.
Yes, we do.
And it's probably this dark humor that helped us survive the dark times that we've lived through. Over 20 years ago, 420,000 missiles fell on Serbia. NATO damaged much more than our infrastructure, factories, television stations, hospitals, schools, kindergartens, our health and environment. They damaged our psyche. Much of the Western world engaged in a merciless propaganda campaign to turn the proud people of Serbia into... And this led many Serbs to think less of themselves, to forget about the great things that we've accomplished in the last decades and centuries.
Whatever you see around us was built by us. Bridges, roads, we were able to produce our own food, electric devices, Not just that we did that, we were exporting things all around the world, competing with the foreign companies.
All this was a problem for NATO. They don't want proud nations competing with Western products and capable of governing themselves. They want colonies, satellites that'll do whatever they're told.
Western countries want to show that if you want to be independent, if you rebel, we will punish you and we will crush you. And not just that, we won't even allow you to be a victim.
So they had to break our spirit, and they chose politicians who were once fiercely anti-NATO to lead the way.
Uveren sam da će oni koji jesu zločinci, a to su pre svih Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, Gerhard Schröder, uskoro u nekom novom Nürnbergu odgovarati za sve zločine koje su počinili nad srpskim narodom i nad ovom zemljom.
But instead of prosecuting all of them at a new Nuremberg-style trial for illegally bombing a sovereign country,
heute Abend hat die NATO mit Luftschlägen gegen militärische Ziele in Jugoslawien begonnen.
Alexander Vučić invited Schroeder to speak at Vučić's presidential campaign rally, exactly 18 years after NATO's bombing started.
Herr Präsident, lieber Freund Alexander,
imagine Franklin Roosevelt inviting Japanese Prime Minister Tojo, the general who ordered the bombing of Pearl Harbor, to campaign for Roosevelt. Believe it or not, the US had different plans for Tojo. But aside from asking for Schroeder's support, an even higher honor was bestowed by Vučić's government upon the most aggressive supporter of NATO's bombing campaign.
Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair will advise Serbia's current Prime Minister, Alexander Vučić, who used to be a staunch critic of the ex-British leader, so much so he edited a book titled English Gay Fart Tony Blair. Classy, huh?
It's a humiliation. I have a physical reaction to that. I remember what kind of lies these people did produce. Maybe actually they're helping government to lie. They know how to do it.
What happened to Serbia was an experiment. They experimented on our environment, our health, our economy, our system, and in the end, our psyche. As the last depleted uranium bombs exploded, the mental bombing continued, and many felt powerless under the weight of chains. Perhaps Nele Karelic said it best back in 1999 during NATO's bombing campaign.
Ja mislim da ovo nije rat između jedne male zemlje na Balkanu, ponosne zbog svoje istorije, sa najvećom svjetskom silom otkako ova planeta postoji. Ja mislim da je ovo rat između dvije različite filozofije života. Ovo je rat između jedne grabežljive, agresivne filozofije života, između jedne nesreće u kojoj zbog trke za profitom ljudi nemaju vremena da pogledaju dobar film i pročitaju dobru knjigu, i jedne druge potpuno suprotne filozofije u kojoj ljudi žele da žive u skladu s prirodom, a ne protiv nje.
Change is no longer a matter of choice. It's a question of our bare survival. Future generations are at stake.
If there is a hope for change, it will come only through self-organized citizens of Serbia.
And when 18-year-old high school student Pavle Cvejić was arrested and expressly sentenced to 30 days of jail time simply because he expressed his political views at a protest in Serbia's national television, his friends from school decided that enough was enough.
Kao njegovi prijatelji i kao mladi smo se ovdje okupili da iskažemo solidarnost što je njemu uskraćeno pravo na normalan život.
Government spokespeople tried to justify the arrest.
Vidite, Vučić hapsi decu. A kako da ne hapsi?
The authorities sent the police to scare the kids. It didn't work. The students threatened the authorities that if they didn't release their friend Pavle, students from other schools would join them. They refused to give up.
Apelacija je ukinula prekršajnu presudu najmlađem političkom zatvoreniku Pavlu Cvejiću i on je pušten iz pritvora.
Yup, the revolt had to begin somewhere. And it did.
Sistem te laže, ne veruj šta ti kaže. Ovaj život je borba od rođenja do groba, zato ustani odmah. Sistem te laže, ne veruj šta ti kaže. Ovaj život je borba od rođenja do groba, zato ustani odmah.
Od malena mene lažu i rade me ko volinu. Pričaju mi za Jožu da se sanka u koritu. Dali su mi maramu, zastavu i zakletvu. Drugovi se ne prodaju ni za kajmaka kašiku. A punje su uvalili po vilama na Dedinju. Šatru svi smo isti, ali svinje ipak vladaju. Smo hteli demokratiju, izašli na ulicu. Trošili energiju, popušili kurčinu. Strane agenture me izvukle ko majmunčinu. Da napije se suzavca, da nam sjebu državu. Sad slušamo baronije iz usta loših glumaca. Al nisu oni vlast, već pozorište lutaka. Znam ja kome laži, od koga sam ja zgažen. Banke, MMF, korporacije su važne, a sistem i postoji da za njih pravi pare. I bit će pravde tek kad ovo carstvo padne.
Sistem te laže, ne veruj šta ti kaže. Ovaj život je borba od rođenja do groba, zato ustani odmah. Sistem te laže, ne veruj šta ti kaže. Ovaj život je borba od rođenja do groba, zato ustani odmah.
Čovek veruje šta vidi, čovek veruje šta čuje. Ne kapira da od rođenja mozak mu se truje. Propagandom sistema kako god se sistem zvao. Tabloidi, televizija, spinovana stvarnost koja radi na tome da izgubiš identitet. Da budeš samo poslušnik, truli mediokritet. Da krivicu svaljuješ, na nevinom iskaljuješ. Veš što si slep, što si ponovo namagarčen. Popio si otkaz, to su reforme, to mora. Nema plate, kasne rate, seku struju odmah. Pa muriju izvršitelje, čekaš kad će doći. Kao neka tvoji preci Turke prve braće noći. A čutao si verovao, nadao si glasao. Sad ne veruješ kako to na dnu da si se našao. Zato trgli se na vreme kad te boli glasno reci. To nisi dužan banci, ali si dužan svojoj deci.
Sistem te laže, ne veruj šta ti kaže. Ovaj život je borba od rođenja do groba, zato ustani odmah. Sistem te laže, ne veruj šta ti kaže. Ovaj život je borba od rođenja do groba, zato ustani odmah.